ordinary summer night, there was something to be said. But in the beauty of her face, all his words slipped away, and it's easy to blame destiny for the things we believe are meant to be. How was he supposed to know that he'd found true love? He came too close, she walked away, caught by someone else's gaze. He missed his chance to speak his mind, and now he glares with jealous
Good morning and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline Hamden. I'm your host Sam Gerwitt, inviting you behind the headlines to talk to the people that make Hamden tick. Walter Molton has been busy up in Hartford since the legislative session began at the beginning of the month. He is Hamden's Director of Legislative Affairs, which means his job is to advocate for Hamden in the capital. He has a list of priorities that he just dropped on the desk here, and I wanted to invite him in to talk about what those are. Thanks for coming in, Walter.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here this morning.
So, you just dropped off this very nice packet with a yellow cover of all of Hamden's legislative priorities, and I want to go through and talk about what those are. But first, just clarify one thing about your job. A lot of people, I think, are confused about the difference between what a municipal I guess Director of Legislative Affairs, as some people might say a municipal lobbyist is, and how your job differs from the role of the state delegation from the town. So could you just talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Very happy to. Again, thanks for having me on this morning. To answer your question and how it differs, well, obviously, flat out, I'm not an elected state official. However, my job is throughout the year to pay attention to issues that require the attention of our state delegation, even our federal delegation. Prior to me getting this job, Hamden never really had that. They never had a point person really who paid attention on a day-to-day basis to legislative issues, whether it's in Hartford, whether it's in D.C., when we're getting into some of the federal funding or monies that we receive, to be the point person to speak with folks, in town government, speak with the other elected officials in town and say, hey, what would we like to focus on? So I'm really just the person that kind of, the mouthpiece, if you will, that connects the town apparatus with our state and federal delegation and focus on it kind of exclusively, because there is, believe it or not, a lot of work, to be done. And even outside of session, in Hartford, there's still a lot of other, whether it's lobbying the legislature, working with the state departments, for example, or some of the federal departments to make certain things happen.
I see. So you have this long list of priorities. What have you done so far in Hartford? The session started, what was it, the 5th?
Yes, session started, I think it was the 5th. So leading up to session, even before session begins, a lot of the work will really start to get done toward the end of this past year, right? So 2019. I started meeting with the mayor. I've met with leadership on council, and over on the Board of Education. We had issues or discussions about what we wanted to see, what issues we wanted to follow up on. Last year, we had some successes and got some things. Then there were some things we didn't get that are still important to us. So so much of it is really starting the conversation with, immediately our state delegation. So Josh Elliott, Mike D'Agostino, Robin Porter, and then our two senators, Senator Looney and Senator Logan, to let them know here's Hamden specific issues this legislative session. And then also I spent a lot of time in the building keeping track of other bills that are submitted that may have an impact to the town, whether it's perhaps one we consider negative or one that we consider positive and would like to work with our peers and other municipalities to support. So even though the list you're looking at now this year, it's a short session, we had 5 specific issues, maybe 6 if you will, but then as the session goes on, we'll kind of add to that. There were bills, for example, that we got pulled into last year we weren't even aware of, that took up some time and having discussions, and then there were others that didn't go how we wanted, for example. So
yeah, you said you managed to accomplish some bills last year but not others. What did you accomplish?
I think the crowning achievement of our delegation and the work was getting a conveyance bill for the High Meadows property, which is at 825 Hartford Turnpike. And the long story short, it's a 50-plus acre plot of land that the state still owns, and it was a detention facility for youthful offenders. It's been vacant now for almost 10 years. There was some talk, I think, within the past 10 years of reopening it, but that did not happen. The town, which is always looking to grow its grand list and do some development, and it was actually our council president, Mick McGarry, who in one of our meetings, and this is funny how things go, one of our meetings last year to develop the priorities, he just threw it out there. It was very matter of fact, and I was like, okay, whatever. And I don't think anyone ever thought that would actually become as big of a deal and become a reality. There were other things that we were focused on, but he brought it up, went up to Hartford, spoke with our delegation, and lo and behold, we were able to get a land conveyance bill. So that was, exciting.
And I assume that's going to be ongoing in this session as well.
Well, so it's right now the town, along with Dale Kroop's office, and I've been working with him. He's our director of economic development, has been doing pre-development work, if you will, to assess the lay of the land, to figure out where any waterways are, doing soil studies, also doing some building inspections because there's actual facilities still there to determine, hey, if we take this plot of land over, what are the issues? What can we do? What can we not do? Will there have to be any type of remediation done on some of the buildings, just so we know, what we're getting into. We don't want to take the land and then come to find out it, may have some issues that makes it, prohibitive. So we're in the fact-finding stage of that still. And we hope to have all that information. We've got surveyors out there. I spoke with Dale last about it about a week ago. Hopefully have it by end of spring, early summer, some of that information that will let us know, okay, here's everything, and we'll ultimately make that decision there if we decide to purchase it or not.
Does the administration have any dreams about what it could do with the property? I know obviously you're still finding out whether, what's feasible, but
right.
In an ideal world, what do you want it to be?
Our focus, the administration's focus, is really to get something there that the community wants to see. Obviously, there's an emphasis on doing economic development and trying to grow our grand list, right? I mean, given the financial situation in town, we're always looking for more folks to come in and do business, right? And so more taxpayers we have, broaden the base. That's always good news. But we also, look, we're not looking to put in some, skyscraper or some absurd high rise by any means. But, it seems like an area, given how it is in a residential neighborhood, maybe some residential developments or maybe some light, medical space or something that wouldn't be a burden. There's no appetite to put a Walmart there, for example, or something of that sort. So whatever would go there would ultimately suit the neighborhood. I know we're looking for a location possibly for an animal shelter. That was maybe floated, using a portion of it to do an animal shelter there. But our hope is just that we can do something that grows the grand list, but we're not looking to do anything outlandish.
I see. So if it's growing the grand list, would it wouldn't necessarily be town owned. It would likely
correct
be a privately owned
absolutely
property. So that in order to get to that point, it was better for the town to buy it, develop it, and then resell it rather than
exactly us owning the property. We're in control of that property's future. So we could decide to say we want to make it a park, or we could decide to say we want to develop it and do an RFP and hear proposals from the business community or developers and what they would do there, and then we would choose. So this puts us in the driver's seat as opposed to a private, land transaction where I decide to sell property I own and someone comes in and buys it, and they can really do whatever they want there without kind of the input of the town and the community. So this way we're in the driver's seat.
I see. Is there anything that so you said, of course, the study is happening this year, or at the moment, is there anything that you need to get done in the state, in Hartford, that is, to continue?
For this specific bill, not at this point in time. Once we get that information back, and let's say we decide to purchase it, then we will have to pay the state. The rough price is $1.7 million, and some change for the plot of land at Success at about $6 million and change.
Right, okay.
But the bill that we got would convey it to the town for $1.7 million, which we'd have to pay to the state. Actually, I think we pay to DAS, but that would be the process. The town would have to find the money, and then we pay the state, and we would they'd send us the deed over. In short.
Now, I want to also talk about some of these other priorities for this session. Could you just briefly go over what the key areas are that you're focusing on?
Yeah. So as always, increase in town aid. I mean, that doesn't make us any different than the other municipalities, 168 other municipalities. But as I'm sure you've heard members on the Board of Ed and Council talk about, being underfunded in ECS for a long time. The state has now a 10-year phase in to get up to 100% of what we should get. We're obviously always advocating for more sooner than later. Pilot reimbursement is huge. Pilot's supposed to be reimbursed at 100%. It's not. I don't have the percentage that we received as a town last year, but I know another example, excess cost on the Board of Ed side with special education. That's supposed to be funded at 100% once you go past a certain level of expenditure. And last year, I believe our reimbursement rate was about 75% to the Board of Ed. So, we've had to pick up that extra 25%. So there's always an emphasis on getting increased aid. One of the other priorities that is kind of a holdover, if you will, from last year was we were successful, at least on the House side, in getting bond requests approved for two projects. The firehouse on Circular Avenue, which I know you visited and covered and saw the condition of that firehouse there, which is also our busiest firehouse in town that services really Southern Hamden, and then also the Keefe Center, which I know you've done articles on just, I think, in the past 2 weeks about the food bank and some of the services there that Adam Senderoff, who does a great job of providing these community programs that there's great need for. That building is in need of some love, to say the least. However, the bond package has kind of been held up as, I guess, as a negotiating tactic for tolls. So once this vote on tolls happens, when it happens, there should be a vote on that bond package, and there will be hopefully more frequently bond commission meetings. So one thing I've been doing is kind of checking in with our state reps on a weekly basis to see how the conversation's going on the vote for tolls, and then also speaking with the governor's staff to urge them to, first meeting, hey, Hamden, we've got some issues, we've got some priorities. Can you see to it that this is a part of the bond package? Another piece that I'm really excited about that we started working on as a town. Let's see. I started last year officially in March when council voted on my position. I would say sometime in April, Del Krupp had come to me at that time and said that he had been working with some connections that he has in Deep to try to address an issue with some structural issues with homes and the Newhall section of Highwood. Some people call it Newhallville. It's technically not Newhallville, but because people know it, that's what I'll call it, the Newhallville, the area by the old middle school and the location where the new business incubator is. He came to me and said, hey, some folks have been having some issues after some of the work was completed almost over 10 years ago since that project's wrapped up. They're having issues with their foundations, and we're trying to see what recourse, we have, what help we can get them. And so for a while, he was like, I just want to make you aware that this is something I'm working on. I don't know if, I want you to get involved just yet. And I said, well, hey, I know folks from my time in Hartford up in Deep, I can make a phone call or stop in and just try to kick the tires as well. And so session kind of came and went, followed up with him in the off session. And he, and Dale, who's a great guy, who's a little funny, finally was like, hey, make a phone call. I can use some help. I'm not getting anything. And so I made a phone call And now, I don't know, by the time I met with folks in Deep, Jim Albus, the former state rep from East Haven, who's the senior advisor at Deep, we started getting in touch via email back in, I think, October, September. I spoke with the other members of our delegation, Robin Porter, whose district it is, Mike D'Agostino, Josh. I told all of our delegation, hey, here's an issue here. And what we came up with, and Dale and I had to do some homework. Our state reps contributed, and so did Jim at Deep, but we had to dig up some of these old bond ordinances from the 2000s. And it's funny how some things work, but a lot of the discussions about that project began in the early 2000s before anything was actually done, and the project started in the later 2000s. So we had to dig up on internet and asking around to try to find these bond ordinances. And lo and behold, we found that for this Newhall project that was completed almost 10 years ago, there was about $6 million left over in monies that hadn't been expended. And so Dale and I became pretty excited because we were saying, well, is it possible that we could use that $6 million to address some of these issues that have popped up after the project's been completed? And so we've been having this ongoing conversation with Deep, with OPM, the governor's office, to find out if we can use the money. Of course, it was almost a little too good to be true. We couldn't, how the ordinance was written, what we're looking to do now, we actually can't expend the money. However, what we're going for now in the bond package, as soon as we get one, and we've got the support from the legislature to do this, Representative Bobby Miller, who's the House bonding co-chair, said we'll do the language tweak, and then the governor will have to approve it at a commission. That'll free up the $6 million. Deep says we need about $2 million to do some additional remediation work in that neighborhood. It was kind of controversial when it happened, I don't know, 15 years ago at this point, but there were some homes that basically fell on the wrong side of a boundary line, people on the other side of the street who weren't eligible for some of this work. So Deep said, let us keep $2 million to address some of those homes, and you guys can have the $4 million. It'll be administered through DECD to the Hamden Economic Development Corporation to do the project, and then go from there. So that's something that is a big win. It's not often you kind of find a pot of money laying around from the state, and they've been very willing and supportive of what we're looking to do to help those homeowners. So that's once that goes through, I think that's a big win for the town and the residents.
No, so these are state issued bonds that
Yes.
that you were digging around and found.
Yep, leftover unexpended money from the Newhallville. I think the official title is the Newhall remediation project that took place. So
what exactly is wrong with the foundations?
So what's happened is that some of the homes that were fixed in the original project, once they've settled, because they had some new fill put in because it was built on frankly, it was a dump. So the state went in partnership with the Olin Corporation and spent tens of millions of dollars to remediate this public property. If I'm correct, Dale told me it's the largest public brownfield in the nation, actually. And they spent a ton of money to take out some of the fill, put in good fill. They fixed people's like patios and driveways. Well, now that they've done some of that work, some homes have gone on to settle, which isn't uncommon, but that settling has caused some issues with the foundations themselves, as far as being the soundness of them. So, and of course, how that project was written, the language in it, we can't use the $6 million right now without that tweak. So,
yeah, I want to go back to one thing you said about other bonding.
Mm-hmm.
Bonding requests for the Keefe Center and for the firehouse, how that's being held up as basically a bargaining chip for tolls.
It seems, and this is just me talking, but it seems like bonding, there's certainly the debt diet, but some folks in the building kind of think that while the debt diet is a debt diet because of maybe the state's overall fiscal health, it's some leverage that frankly the governor's office has over legislators, and saying, because he sets the bond agenda. So the CGA can bond all the money in the world. However, if the governor doesn't put it on an agenda and call the bond commission meeting and approve it, it doesn't do anything. So some folks have said this is a play to kind of starve out some districts and the legislators for support, because everybody, if there's one thing there's ever consensus on, it's usually the bond package, because legislators all want things for their district, and rightfully so. They represent them. They have to bring things back. So some folks are of the belief that this is certainly a play to see to it that the votes are there.
I see. Well, isn't Hamden's delegation, in large part in favor of tolls? I mean, Looney certainly is.
Yes, to my knowledge, the exception would be Senator Logan, who I think's come out very much against tolls. The rest of the delegation, it seems to have been supportive of it. So, and they're simply waiting for the vote to happen at a date to be determined.
I see. On ECS funding and other forms of state revenue, how do you get more for the town? You said that Hamden's been shorted. How much? I've heard something to the tune of $17 million.
17, 18 for a long time. It's a lot of what I do is starting a conversation. Letting other legislators know. Hey, here's what's going on in Hamden. Here are our issues. Testifying on bills, setting up meetings for the mayor and the council president to attend with leadership up at the state to let them know that hey, Hamden's here. We have issues. But at the same time, as much as it's my job to advocate for what we need, also pragmatic, and I know that the state has its fiscal woes, and frankly they've been cutting back in state aid for many years. After the recession, we had a sluggish recovery. Revenues are down on their side, so they've been cutting back on what they give to towns. I will say it's refreshing this year to see, at least in the governor's budget, that the numbers we budgeted for last year or saw last year as far as town aid are looking to remain the same. We actually, depending on his amendments and if Approps approves it, can get an extra $40,000 a year this year. So, we'll take it. But sometimes it's not necessarily about coming back with more. It's about not losing, what you told you were get.
And Hamden has lost in the past.
Yes, yeah, from our perspective. But we've being held harmless in ECS and Alliance, which is because we are an Alliance district, and that's another pot of money that we rely on to provide services, in district. So.
Now, a lot of these priorities are very Hamden development specific. Does the administration have any goals that are less
Hamden
specific and less specific to development in Hamden? Maybe goals like I know the delegation has its own goals, its own policy-related goals. Does Hamden support any more policy-related pieces of legislation?
Not. There. I will say this. My jobs represent obviously the town of Hamden, so we have some very direct needs. As far as maybe some broader issues, if we've weighed in, I know since being up in the building now that the legislators know, hey, there's a point person for Hamden, they'll oftentimes ask questions, how would this affect Hamden, or do you have a stance on it? It's interesting. We've worked with CCM. Last year there was a bill that would have been very helpful for the town, but other municipalities there was broad support for. It was a bill that would allow that would establish a second tier in CMERS, which is the municipal retirement system. Right now, there's only one tier. We're looking to establish a second tier that would be a cost savings to the town for new hires. For example, it would raise the retirement age. You wouldn't be able to put overtime. Overtime wouldn't count towards your pension because we as a town, I think since, forget the year, but when the town switched over from its own pension system to the state's, all employees go into this one tier. Obviously, we're looking to find some cost savings for new employees. We worked with CCM to do that. We were at least able to get language put in to increase the contribution rate of employees, but we weren't successful in getting that second tier yet. So that's an issue that we've worked on that doesn't just affect Hamden, but would probably affect other municipalities. And like I said, there was CCM was supporting it and pushing it pretty hard because it's a big deal to its membership.
Right. Do you have any insight about why that hasn't happened yet? Because the state municipal employee retirement system does now have a lot of tiers.
Yeah,
and it's been
4 tiers. I think 4. At a minimum 4.
There,
yeah, and that's what's frustrating is that the state certainly realized that its pension system wasn't sustainable for various reasons, and so they've established through the years different tiers. And so it's a little frustrating that the municipalities are looking to establish a second tier, much like how the state has, and we weren't allowed to do that. I think some of it too is that unions have a lot of influence in the state and with members in the legislature, and it's maybe something that they didn't want. for various reasons. But it's a little frustrating that the state, from our perspective, is like they've looked out for themselves to create this various tiers, and hey, your towns and cities you represent need this as well, because currently it's not the most sustainable either. So maybe it gets some more attention this session or in coming session as the noise around it kind of grows. One thing I've noticed, even in my time working for the Senate Dems up there before this job, is oftentimes when a bill finally passes, it's probably not the first session that it's been introduced and debated and talked about. It does take time, because any bill or anything you're working on, there's a group of folks who are for it, a small group that are automatically against it, and then you've got the majority that are in the middle that you've got to do that outreach to and explain. There's an education, and then folks have to care about it and vote for it. So it is a process. So hey, we started it last year, so stay tuned.
I just want to remind our listeners that this is WNHH Radio's Dateline Hamden, broadcast at 103.5 FM and live streamed at www.newhavenindependent.org. My guest today is Walter Molton, who is Hamden's Legislative Affairs Director and also a member of the Board of Education. You said that it could have something to do with unions lobbying against or not supporting a bill that would create tiers in the state's municipal employees' retirement system. Is there a difference between the way that unions lobby from state employee unions can lobby and unions of municipal employees?
I don't know. I don't think there's a different way. I know that unions oftentimes have a person who's their political director, who will do some direct lobbying of legislative members. They will also, it's not uncommon to have different unions do lobbying days up in Hartford where they bring their membership up, whether it's nurses or CNAs or Teamsters, whomever, educators will come up and they go around and speak with legislators. And just like I showed you a list of legislative priorities, they have a list of legislative priorities. I just think as far as the state retirement system goes, that's very much the discretion of the General Assembly, right, in the governor's office. Whereas the retirement system for Hamden or New Haven, it's a local issue. It's a hit to the local budget as opposed to the state budget.
Right.
So I think from their perspectives, there's maybe a bit more of immediacy. Then also, understandably, unions are looking to represent, their employees and look out for their best interest and try to get them all that they can, and as they should. That's why they exist. So certainly understand the sentiment of maybe not willing to allow that. Again, I don't know. I can't say that I definitively spoken with a person from labor and say, well, this is exactly why, but just my thoughts.
Right. In this packet, one of the priorities is special legislation that would extend the deadline to start a revaluation. Mm-hmm. What's going on with Hamden's revaluation?
So at the moment, we are still we're still seeing what needs to be done as far as doing a reval. And there was some, at least initial concern that, maybe it would be a little tight in the timeline as we had some turnover in the office to maybe get it done. So our town attorney, Sue Gruen, had actually did some homework, some great homework, and found that, and brought it to the attention that, well, there is precedent for municipalities needing a bit more time to do the reval for various reasons, making sure you find a vendor, the money's there, your staff are ready to handle it. And I think most recently, if you look in the packet, most recently it was Madison, Naugatuck, and Stafford who delayed their revals from 17 to 18, just to give them a bit more time to do the work, to do it right, and then go forward from there. So the town, I know that our delegation has put the bill in so that we have a bill in should we have to pull that lever, but it has not officially been decided that, hey, we're definitely going to extend. So I know that our finance director, well, as I'm sure you reported, we've got an interim finance director and now a permanent finance director and deputy finance director who started today. They oversee actually the tax assessor's office. I know they're getting up to speed, and we should hopefully know in the next couple of weeks where we stand, if we will actually need to pursue the legislation further, or perhaps we won't need to. So it's just something we put in there to make sure we're covered, because last thing we wanted to do was to be in a situation where, hey, we need an extension, but we missed our window, if you will.
Right. Would it extend it a year or half a year?
We'd only be looking for a year, just 1 year. And again, with the extension, if we did extend it 1 year, because statutorily municipalities have to do it every 10 years, doesn't mean we have to wait until the last day of that 1 year extension to do the revow. I mean, our hope would be to get it started as soon as possible, so that it, maybe if it is delayed, it's maybe only delayed by a month or two. But however, we need that special legislation to extend it, and then also to avoid a pretty hefty fine levied by OPM for noncompliance.
Right. The in the assessor's office, the chief assessor, of course, John Gelati, left in the fall, and there's some interim help or consulting help in the office right now. Who's there?
Tom Malloy, if I'm saying his last name right. Good guy, hired. He's been there with some other help on late nights and weekends, kind of burning the midnight oil, getting caught up, and making sure that we will be in a good place to do this revow. But I spoke with him a little bit. I'm not really a subject matter expert on administrative aspects of the town. However, when they have issues that involves our various delegations, that's where I've come in. So I actually lean, very heavily on just like Dale Krupp or Tom to tell me, well, hey, what's the issue? What's going on? And I kind of bring the legislative, expertise, if you will, to the table and help there. So, but yeah, I can't really speak too much more to the tax assessor's office function, other than they're always timely about sending me my tax bill. So
yes. Back to the state. Some members of the delegation have been talking about tax equity across municipalities. Martin Looney has talked about that. I think at various points I've heard other legislators talk about it, and also a lot of candidates for the legislature talk about that as a priority for Hamden and also New Haven. Is that something that the town is also pushing for at the state level?
Absolutely. One commission that I sit on, along with Mayor Lang, CCM has this great commission on property tax reform, and because it's an issue that cities, big and small, towns, everybody deals with, is that we rely on a very regressive tax to provide the majority of local funding, also to include special education funding, and as a result, there's a lot of disparity. Because what you're able to raise at a municipal level depends on how much your grand list is worth. So you have a place like Greenwich, whose tax mill rate is somewhere in the low teens. You come to Hamden, and we're a hair short of 49, right? But that difference determines how much you can do as far as education, which is a big expense. Things like road paving, other services, public safety, and it's just it's a system that's. It's a little unfair, right? You live in a district whose property is worth more. Your grand list, you're able to generate, more revenue and do more. But meanwhile, you have places that have a lot of need. Take us in Hamden, 20% of our grand list we can't tax, right? And not all of tax-exempt property is eligible for reimbursement and pilot. And then, mind you, pilot's not funded at 100%, right? So there's a conversation I know that the mayor's had, and Mick McGarry, who's our council president, and the Board of Education with all of our delegation, is figuring out how we can do a better job of assessing a tax that's fair and really equitable. How can we get to a tax system that's less regressive? Because it means we could, do a lot of things. I know Senator Looney last session had floated an idea of assessing a statewide mill rate. So everybody would pay an additional mill. It would go to the state, and then the state would administer that money to do something like, hey, we can fully fund ECS next year, right? We can fully fund excess costs. We can, fund pilot and some of the other programs that we have, and that had some support from certain communities. There were others who maybe weren't as inclined to support it because, hey, it is a tax increase, right? But for those that the big cities or first ring suburbs like Hamden is one that has some issues, and we have such a mix of land. We've got everything from urban to farm, and in between. And we've got Quinnipiac too, which is a big tax exempt entity, in town. And so I know that the mayor, council president, folks on the board, we've been very, very supportive of doing that. But it's going to be a process. I know the Property Tax Commission on the CCM side that we're involved with is looking to have some ideas or report out ahead of next session for the budget to say, hey, here's an area where hopefully we can get some consensus with all of the membership and see what we can do. So we've been looking at case studies in other places. We've been looking at also how the state's pension system is set up and reforms there, because we also realize, though, as a local government, that if the state's healthy and they're doing well, that's good news for us at the local level, right? If that's not the case, then that causes problems. So we very much want to be collaborative in what we do and try to, help us help you. These things don't happen in a vacuum. So that commission is looking at ways to both address the local level issues, but also being mindful and cognizant that the state has their own issues, and we all need to have some skin in the game. And hopefully we can get there. I know there's sometimes a lack of trust, I think, between local governments and state governments for various reasons. I don't know, me being a little more youthful than a lot of folks I work with, I'm optimistic that maybe we can turn the corner, because we have to. We've got to work together and do things differently than we're doing. If that answers your question.
Yep. Are there any bills you're afraid of this year that you think could negatively impact Hamden?
There's nothing that I'm afraid of just yet. There's quite a few bills that have been put in. I haven't been able to get through all of them just yet. But public hearings are only beginning. So as you know, when bills are put in, they're pretty much just one or two sentences, and then it's a blank bill that has no content, and it's ambiguous as to what it will ultimately end up saying. So usually we wait until a little further to see what bills are maybe lined up to be JF'd and what the content will be. I know actually it was, what's a conservative think tank? The Yankee Institute?
Yeah, Yankee
they
Institute.
released, interestingly enough, some very progressive reforms about how Harvard runs. And one of them is the fact that you have these public hearings and folks to come in and testify on a one or two sentence bill, and you have no idea what the content is. So they were saying you should have a real bill that people can dig into and speak affirmatively to, and that would, provide some clarity, because it's not uncommon for that language to actually come out the day it's time to JF it. And, the public doesn't really have the inside track. I mean, me being in the building, full time and working, I may know things and find things out a bit ahead of time, but the average Joe whose job it isn't, to be in Hartford all the time, keeping track of legislation is in the dark. So nothing that scares us just yet. I can say last year, one thing that scared us, and to my knowledge, it hasn't come back, is there was a bill that would have required municipalities to start contributing a portion to the teacher's retirement that's administered by the state. And as you can imagine, that caused a lot of concern with the municipalities, that they were looking to move some of that burden back onto the municipalities. Fortunately, it didn't go anywhere, thank God. But that's something definitely to keep an eye on, because that was a significant expenditure to the town here in Hamden.
Yeah. One more point on the list of legislative priorities.
Sure.
Senior tax relief?
Yeah. So there's some programs to offer senior citizens, retired individuals, some tax relief, right? Because when an individual retires on a fixed income, their ability to go out and earn more to keep up, the cost of living is minimized. So there's a program that's administered by the state which determines the qualifying level of income for this tax relief program, but it will basically lock in your property taxes, where you're at. So that way over time, hey, if you retire at 60 and you live to be 80, your taxes are probably still going to go up over that 20-year stretch, but you don't have the means to keep up with that. And so this creates it's an existing system that creates a tax relief to say you're locked in and allows seniors to manage their fixed income. However, due to things in Hamden's situation, the state's overall situation, we had a bill in last year, and forgive me, I don't remember the number, with planning and development that would have done just this, but we're just looking for the state to allow a greater range of qualifying income so we can lower it, because there's some folks who are just right there on the bubble that fall outside of qualifying. However, if they could qualify, it would change a lot for them. And I know the mayor has been very, very adamant about this particular piece as well, because we have a large senior retired population in Hamden. So trying to help them and hold them harmless as much as possible is important to us. And on my way in, before speaking with you, I know Representative Elliott, we had been emailing back and forth about this, and put me in touch again with Representative McCarthy Vahey from Fairfield, who's the chair of Planning and Development, to have some more discussions about what we can do, and if it's possible to do something just at the local level, perhaps without getting the state involved.
Yeah. So the state legislation, though, would make it possible for Hamden to determine a different threshold.
Exactly.
That would make someone eligible.
Exactly. That's our hope. That's our hope.
How would that affect the bottom line of tax revenue in the town?
So it would be, a hit to revenue in that those individuals' revenue or their taxes wouldn't increase. So any increase from where we're at currently, we wouldn't realize that. from them. It's certainly not a tax reduction. I guess it's actually more of an avoidance of future increases. Again, depending on what number would ultimately be chosen, and then how many folks were then eligible, it's a great question for our tax assessor to figure out what the exact impact would be to the grand list. But going forward, we wouldn't, see perhaps as much revenue, but it's not an astronomical loss to the grand list. It's not like some big nonprofit moved in and brought up half a block, so to speak.
Right. Is the town also thinking about regionalization of school boards? Is that something that first is on the table this year again? And is that something that Hamden would potentially support?
So regionalization, I know, the idea of it, or shared services, which is the buzzword that they use, because I guess regionalizing doesn't brief as well. That's something a lot of folks see a need for, and as a way to perhaps be a cost savings, but to administer government more effectively. I mean, when it comes to education, like we saw last year, there are some folks who have no interest in joining another municipality, which I think is unfortunate. It gets back to the question you asked about tax equity, right? I mean, we have a very, very successful, nationally renowned regionalized school model here in the Valley, right? With the schools, in Ansonia, in Orange, and the regional schools, Amity regional schools, which are very successful, and they do just that. The other state's been a little slow to get there. I get that folks like to, have their own control. But I know as a town, we're always looking for ways to engage in sharing services. Like I know another group that I sit on as Kurt's proxy is SCROG, and that's a local COG, if you will, Council of Governments. And so we'll apply for different grants. Like I know, for example, we're applying for a grant to do an assessment and provide some best practices and improvements for cybersecurity, right? So that's, I forget exactly how many are in SCROG, somewhere in the teens, mid to high teens, but we all, passed resolutions at the local level, applied for this grant, waiting to see if we'll get it from the Department of Homeland Security, and then that's money that we can expend, to address issues. So there's some shared services and regionalization that's taken place. Education is kind of the next big, nut that needs to be cracked and discussed, and that's a heck of a discussion, because people do feel very passionately about their school districts. I mean, me personally, I'm supportive of it, but other folks would have concerns. So we'll see. I know in town we're always looking for ways though to share services and do things with neighbors as a way to save on costs.
I want to thank our guest, Walter Molton, for coming in and talking about Hamden's legislative priorities today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Walter. Again, this is WNHH Radio's Dateline Hamden. I'm Sam Gerwitt, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Have you ever had that feeling? Ooh, that special feeling. When somebody loves you.
This is Harry Dros, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven.